So today we have a whole new angle of the blanket fort, and we have a Jonna, and we have a Cedar. Whoop.
We have a Cedar.
Hey.
We're a little bobbly today.
You know, it's got an automatic stabilizer, so
yes.
Hopefully the bobble doesn't show.
So we're playing with a new toy today. A couple of new toys, because
yes.
my phone decided, my lovely 8S phone decided it finally had to die, which was horrible.
All things come to an end.
I know, and I really loved my phone. And it was very much part of my artistic existence for a long time. But when I was in Italy, I realized, I was watching Don take pictures with his much improved iPhone, and was like, ooh. And then my phone died and solved that problem. So now we have a new toy to add to the BroadCast adventure.
And I had picked up the opposite of your very expensive, lovely new phone, which is the cheapest cell phone gimbal selfie stick thing, tripod, that I could get because I wasn't sure we were going to use it, and now
we're trying it. And we are sans the brunette version of, because she ran away to Denver and is busily doing important things. So
stuff to do
because we can't stay in the same spot for I think the next time we're all in the same spot is at LibertyCon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, which should be entertaining. Where I get to be crafty. With all you authors, I get to actually just be crafty and do the thing I like to do. I'll have my sewing machines with me. I'm sitting next to my sewing machine, my favorite one.
People up.
I'll be tying people up because I seem to do that at
and taking people's measure, which you're very, very good at.
And taking people's measure. Yes. There are no secrets from your tailor. So, weirdly enough, at one point I actually knew all of Lady Gaga's measurements. So, because a friend of mine who makes beautiful ruffs, Elizabethan ruffs, had been contacted by her company for one of the video things, and they sent her measurement sheet so she could make a custom ruff. But it was the entire measurement sheet. That woman is tiny. She's like this little teeny slip of a human being. So
she's very
delicate,
athletic with what she does.
Very bird bones.
Not as much as Pink with the whole acrobat stuff.
Yeah, who's just both
of them are really hard workers.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
And very active people.
Yes, very active. But also not very big people. So, it's a lot easier when you're smaller. So, anyhow. But yeah, I was having I spend so much time around authors talking about words and doing word things and being involved with word stuff. Remember we were talking last time about being the electric eel in a bowl of goldfish? I'm the only person here who really sews extensively. Rita's getting back into it. Thank goodness I have somebody else to talk to. But nobody else really does that here.
I don't anymore.
No.
I used to. But I haven't got time.
No.
We just actually had that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the whole lack of time thing, because I haven't had much time to sew, because I've been more focused on doing my eBay work, because I went to Italy and came home incredibly poor. And I'm trying to liquidate an entire estate of tins, which is kind of fun, especially some of the tins we've been through this week.
Oh, yeah.
But I also, I have this driving urge, plus I have Dickens Fair coming up in November, for which I need to make stock.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's actually something that's occurred to me when we're talking about this, is that I've seen a lot of crafters fall into this rut of not preparing ahead of time.
Oh, God. Oh, my Lord.
And you have to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm already behind. It's about to be June, and I'm already behind. But because I didn't sell really well last year, I've got about a third of the inventory I need, which is behind me on the rack. We can look at some of it because it's fun. But I'm like, oh my Lord, I have so much I have to make, and in order to sell enough to make it worthwhile. And they don't figure out. So when I do Dickens Fair, I am there for 5 weekends. I have to pay for my housing and my food and the fees to get in and everything. So I know a cost per hour open at the fair of how much I have to make in terms of money to break even. So so that tells me how much basic inventory I need.
Right.
And then I know that I only sell about 60% of what I take. So then I have to do my calculations based on previous years of how many of my big items I need, because my capes sell between $400 and $650 a piece.
Yeah.
Right. And then I have pin cushions, and I have pins, and I have cuffs, and all those little fill-in lower price items, so I can hit all of the price points.
Right.
To figure that out, which tells me how much inventory I have to make. And I'm way behind
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
in June.
And I hate to see you rushing.
Yeah, well, and these aren't things you want to rush either,
No.
So, because I started doing it, because Victorian capes for me were like one-offs. They were. I never make the same one twice.
Yeah.
And when you're doing shows, it's like, wow, let's make 14 tutus all the same. This is so exciting.
Yeah.
It's boring.
Okay, we're not sure what happened there,
Yes,
so
hit the
give
stop
us a second.
We'll edit that one.
Again, talk about. So, when Jonna talks about making capes, this is the beginning of a cape.
Well,
Or
it's
the halfway through.
This is about a halfway through cape, because hold that thought. Why don't you follow me over here? I'll show you the beginning point of a cape. Because now you get to learn about what Jonna does, right? So here's my rack. This is my rack of capes that I'm working on right now. So when I begin a cape, I start with a pattern. And my patterns actually come from my tattered ladies. You see this? This is an actual Victorian cape with beadwork. And you can see the inside of it. And I call them my tattered ladies because they're falling apart. And one of the reasons I love these so much is because as they're falling apart, I don't feel guilty about using them for a pattern. I can see how they're constructed on the inside. I can see what hand stitching has happened, what kind of hooks and eyes they've used, how many layers there are in the construction. See, like the silk is all shattered on this, but you can see inside what they used for the lining.
Yeah.
And how they sewed on the trim. These are beautiful. And you can also see how they constructed the trim and the collars. And the fact that this edge is not finished. It's an unfinished edge that's just been cut. Isn't that pretty? So I have several of these that I use as my patterns for my capes that are all just kind of falling apart. I love this one too because this one's really pretty, but it's going to pieces, but that's okay because as it falls apart, it's telling me things. It's talking to me and explaining to me how it was constructed. And it's like being friends with a stitcher from the Victorian era because I get to see what she did and how she constructed something.
Which is an amazing thing to be able to do.
Yeah, she had a very nice hand. See how tiny her little stitches are? She was stitching this around. And then this silk that's in the collar is actually hand stitched on. And I think she probably bought this already with the edge already sewn, but there's two layers here. There's this layer, and then there's this layer, which is shredding. And then there's a piece of trim right in the middle of this collar. So all of these things teach me how these Victorian capes were made. And they also give me the shapes for them too. See, this one's a full circle. Kind of cool. So that's where I start, is with these. And then I draw off a pattern and I cut out what are called my blanks. I have a stack of patterns that I've drawn off of these various guys, and I have these ready to go. This is just the fancy fabric without any of the trim on it, without any of the lining. This one's cut on a full circle. Isn't that gorgeous fabric?
Yes, that's why I'm getting so close to it.
I know it feels so good. And these are my collar pieces, so because this has a standing collar on it.
That is just an amazing blue.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning. The question is, which side of the fabric do you use, right?
That side.
Right?
Or that side.
Or that side. Or that side. Or that side.
Oh,
right?
You can't really do them so they're reversible. So
Well, no, actually, I do make them reversible, some of them. So then I have a blank, and at this point, I usually finish the edges and I put all the trim on.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have to put the trim on it first before you put the lining in. Because if you put the trim on when the lining is in, the stitching shows through, and that's tacky.
Yes.
So tacky. So I spend a lot of time putting a trim on.
I've seen you do some of these.
Yeah, see now this one, the trim has been put on by hand, and I'm still not done with this one. I got bored and I stopped. You can see my big ass needle. But this one's in process. But the only way to sew this on is to do it by hand. So,
Yes.
so what I'll do is I will sit at Dickens Fair and I will hand sew on the trim.
It looks like hedgehogs.
I know, doesn't it? Yeah. So this one is in process because I still have to go the rest of the way around.
Mm-hmm.
And I work on them for a while until I get bored. And then I move on to the next one and go, oh, I'll just work on that one next. And sometimes I get really insane. And do things like this one. This one's fun. So this one, get a little education in Jonna's work. This one I'm sewing on appliques. So what I'm doing is I'm sewing around the edge of all of this. As you can see, they come on netting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to go back through and cut all the netting out. So it's a lot of little stitches.
Wow.
Yeah. And then when I get done, I come back with scissors with very sharp points and I cut all this netting out. So I get this lovely effect that it looks like I embroidered it on. In the time period, they would have embroidered it on, but I don't have that skill. So this part is ready to have the netting cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I have a beautiful white beaded lace that goes on the bottom of that one. So once that's done, and another one that's really pretty too. Another Jonna is Psychotic one. This one. Same thing. This was all on netting. Isn't that pretty?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Same kind of thing.
All the shiny.
All the shiny. This has a silver beaded lace that goes on the bottom of it. So that one will happen. So when I get done with that, then I put the linings in. Let's go with another blue one. This one I like because it has Italian trim on it. And a really pretty pin because I don't sell them without a pretty pin.
They're not complete without it.
Well, people don't know how to wear them. So, so this one, I've got I just put trim on it, which I put on by machine. See, it's like velvet ribbon with a trim over the top and then with a fancy thing on the bottom with a really pretty white brocade lining. This one is sort of reversible. You could reverse it if you wanted to, but it also needs pressing. But the collar stands up really pretty when I put it on something. So I make 50 to 60 of these for Dickens every year.
And you were telling me you never repeat them.
I never repeat. I haven't made, I've made almost 400 of them, and they're all different. And they vary depending upon, you know, they have different sizes and different colors. And they're just little shoulder capes. I love this one. It's one of the very first ones I ever made.
That one's fun.
Isn't that fun? It is screaming pink.
Oh, yes.
Screaming pink with all of this wonderful, you can see with the inspiration from the other cape with all of this on the top.
Yeah.
This is one of the very first ones I made 8 years ago. Have not sold it, but I think I've put it on something like 30 little girls to get their pictures taken with all the pretty pink. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
No, it just needs the absolute right person.
Oh, well, you know, I think it's supposed
Somebody
to stay
out
with me.
there it belongs to, and you just haven't met that person yet.
No, and that does kind of, it is how they kind of work out. That I've been making them for somebody. It's like I made a red and black one, and I posted a picture of it, and Mona Lisa was like, "That's mine." And I went, "Well, you have to try it on." That's mine. So I took it to FenCon, and she put it on. She went, "This is mine." And I'm like, "Okay, just give me your Visa card." So, and she took it home. It's very definitely hers.
Mm-hmm.
And they too tend to claim people. I love this one. So this one is green silk velvet with a green silk trim that I bought in Florence from a lovely gentleman. He and his wife had a trim store for 50 years. And every year I went to Florence, I would buy at the trim store. But the last time I was there 3 years ago, they were going out of business.
Oh.
They had decided to retire. So I ended up, they gave me a great deal because I'd been coming there for years and years. And so I have stacks of trim over there still from them. This is an Edwardian silk collar, handmade. It's got a few little spots that have issues, but
It's Edwardian.
it's Edwardian. It's
I
allowed.
think we all have issues as we get older.
It's also lined with,
I love that lining, though.
yeah, this is French silk taffeta. Scalamandry French silk taffeta. Isn't that pretty?
Mm-hmm. I like this color palette.
Yeah, it's got a wonderful feel to it. So,
Yes.
and that's the reason I love to make these is because each one of these is its very own story.
Mm-hmm.
They all kind of take on names and things when I'm working on them. They have a very definite personality, and they end up having a person that has to own them. So, but for me, this is where I live. This is the thing I love to do, and I don't have as much time to do it as I would like, because my career pretty much imploded. And so this is really the only kind of sewing I'm getting to do, which is a good thing. But it's because I need to sell them. But you should pet this. You should just pet this right here. Just run your hand down this silk.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that nice? It's like petting a kitten, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Only this one won't knock my orchids over.
No. No, it will not. So that's like this. Where to go? I believe that if we're going to have to wear clothes, we should wear things that make us feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And that feel good themselves, right?
Right.
Feel this one. I know you guys can't feel it on screen, but run your hand that way.
Oh,
Go like this.
yes.
It's like
So
sealskin.
soft.
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
kitten, isn't it? Rita's running away.
I am. What are you feeling of?
You need to come feel this.
Feel
This
the
is actually
velvet.
this is a it's a reproduction sealskin.
Wow.
Yeah, run your hand on it this way. No seals died for this fabric.
I approve this message.
Yes, but doesn't that feel amazing?
It does feel amazing.
Yeah, it's just like, woo, this feels so good. So when you wear this, with all this marvelous sparkly on it, you know, you wear all this beautiful stuff and sparkly, you just can't help but feel incredibly luxe.
It is sumptuous.
It is sumptuous, and that's the point. Is that, you know, we should have sumptuous things to wear,
Yes.
don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Plus, I mean, if you're wearing something petable, that means somebody can pet you.
Opulent.
Well, I mean, this is why Courtney owns the T-shirt that says "Do not pet the emotional support human without
Yes.
permission."
Yes, but I make these to be petable because quality fabrics in this amount you can afford, unless of course
Yes.
it's €6,000. Oh my lord! Yeah, that was pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
When I used to do a lot more thrifting, I would actually like walk down the aisle and run my hands
Yeah.
over the shoulders because I could tell
Yeah,
silk and cashmere and preferred, generally speaking, although it's funny because I discovered that there's some acrylic sweaters that are super soft and I
Yeah.
like the way they feel.
yeah,
And there's other acrylic sweaters that are like no touchy. No.
nasty.
But I've always preferred doing like the natural fibers because they feel better.
They feel better. It's
So-
better for our skin too. I mean, unnatural fibers are they're just unnatural. I mean, and I have all of my best fabric is on the rack right behind this. You know, so all my pretty stuff that I make it out of is back there. But and I don't get to come over here and pet the fabric nearly as much as I would like, but
once in a while, it's good to find an excuse.
yeah, it's good to find an excuse. But I mean, you will find that if you watch me in the videos, I'm always playing with fabric that I have in front of me, because I'm a texture junkie.
Yes.
So, and I find it difficult sometimes when I go to conventions, if I see somebody's shirt messed up or their collar and stuff, and I'm like,
Yes.
like, what are you doing? It's like,
Want
no,
to fix
it's
you?
okay. It's just like, it's gonna fix you. It's okay. I should show you the lace for this. Hold that for a sec.
Okay.
I'll be there in just a sec.
I will stay here, and we'll look at the lovely applique.
Yeah, it's pretty okay.
Well, that, and I'm having fun with the camera, figuring out how close I can zoom in to about there.
You guys get to learn from our experimentation.
Right, and get really up close and personal with this fabric and this beautiful applique here.
Yeah, that one was kind of a bear because I was trying to work around all the beads at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you know, there was a definite, I'm going to throw this across the room feel.
Oh, I can absolutely see that, because I've done some beading. I've never done anything like this, but beading in itself is a bit of a pain, and then trying to sew something with beads onto something else. Yeah.
Move these out of the way. So this is the lace edge that's going to go on the bottom.
So you won't use the whole width of that.
No, I'll just use some of it.
Okay.
Just enough. Stop. Hi,
Okay. You guys all.
we're filming.
Oh, you all? Got this?
Mm-hmm.
So this is more of a silvery gray.
Yeah, same thing with this. This is all
Yeah.
very silvery.
It almost looked white, but now that that's next to it, I can actually see it better.
Yeah, so
Funny
if you
how
put it over here.
funny how colors work like that.
Mm-hmm. So you can see it. I'm throwing little beads everywhere from having cut it.
Yeah, I see those.
Mm-hmm. That pretty.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so about that much of it will be coming off the bottom edge of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I have all these motifs on here
That you'll use for other capes.
that I can cut out and use on other capes. So,
Yeah, and those are pretty.
yeah, aren't they lovely? So I did this when I was working on Snow Queen. When I made the crows, we bought 3 yards of French beaded lace, and I cut out the motifs and put them on all the tops for it. So, which is sewing this stuff down.
Sewing the trim down is your least favorite thing to do?
It's the gathering.
Now you had explained how to do gathering without
Oh, yeah.
math.
Yeah, you can gather without math. Which is, I was explaining this to Rita. It's just, so a lot of people think that there's a whole lot of math in sewing. I was going to tell you, historically, there's not a whole lot of math in sewing.
No.
Not at all. So, so many people are caught up in the modern interpretation of you must take measurements and you have to do calculations. So if you want to put this much ruffle into this much thing, you have to do 4 times this, and then you have to mark off and measure. I'm like, why are you bothering? That's way too much work. You know, it's like, what is wrong with you?
I am all in favor of less math. So
Because I can't do my multiplication tables. So I have this round thing, right? I have this cape, and I have this giant bit of ruffle. I don't know if you guys can see that or not.
no, but I can make it possible.
Okay, so I have this enormous amount of lace that I want to make match up around this thing, right? So the nice thing about this is it already has a hem, so I don't have to do the hem. So what I do is I take the entire thing and I fold it in half.
Right.
And at the halfway mark, I put a safety pin.
Aha.
See my little safety pin?
And a safety pin will stay put, unlike a regular pin,
Yes,
which
but-
could fall out.
But I put it down just a little ways. I put a little safety pin, and then I fold it in quarters.
And you put another safety pin.
And I put another safety pin,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I take my cape and I fold it in half. Dun, dun, dun. And I know that this is my ends here, and I know this is my middle, so I put a safety pin.
Right.
And then I fold it in quarters, and I put 2 pins. And then I lay the ungathered stuff on it, and I match up this pin to here, and I match up my front edges to there, to my front edges, making sure that I have the right sides together, because we all know how that works out, right?
Yeah.
And then I match up my quarters. And then I sit down and I do all the gathering. I pull the gathering threads for here to here, and I make it even.
I was going to ask that
Yeah.
you do gathering, because that's how I was taught.
Yeah,
How to do gathering.
but the other
was
thing I do
threads.
also is to make it more even. I take the two pieces of fabric and I pull them apart. I have it pinned here and here, and I pull them apart. One will be longer because it's the thing, and I mark the center, and then I mark the center, and then I bring the center to the center, and I put a pin. And then I do the same thing in this space. I pull them apart, and I find the center and the center, and I pin them there. And then I do the same thing here. And then I pull the gathering thread, and I know, and I keep the same amount of fabric between each one of those pins,
Right.
right?
And that makes very good sense.
Now, you don't have to pull a gathering thread. You could just pull from center and pin, and pull from center and pin, and pull from center and pin, until your pleats are the size you want, and then you push them all flat, iron them down, and sew them.
That would be almost like a very regular pleat.
Yes, it
Whereas
is.
the gathering this way is a little more organic, if that makes sense. At least to my eye.
Well, it's organic, mostly because this side of it is looking very loose, and but when you get down to actually sewing it, and when I sew it, I sew with one finger here and one finger here, and I'm pulling to make sure that the fabric is straight as I'm sewing it.
It's a little hard to see with the lighting black on black, but I think you
Yeah,
guys should be
you
able
guys,
to
you
see
can
it.
see this where this. Some
Yeah,
people when they
yeah.
start sewing, their pleats kind of start going like this. You don't do that. You go nice and slow.
Yeah.
And you sew just down along your gathering line, but you go slowly, and you pull the pleat so it's straight.
And that's something I had to learn when I was learning how to sew, was to go slow, because I mean, I did a lot of hand sewing, because I was sewing, the initial things that I was sewing for really were for reenactments. So
Yeah.
I was doing period pieces
Yep.
with lots and lots of hand stitching.
Lots of hand stitching. You know, people are like, "Oh my God, how did they do that?" My response is, by hand.
By hand.
What an idea! How did they get that beautiful piece of applique to look so good on the fabric? They did it by hand.
And you feel when you're doing stuff by hand, you can really, I mean, you're as slow as it's gonna go.
Have you, as an
You
author?
really feel.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you, as an author, tried to bully the words into a story?
Yes.
How well does that work for you?
Not at all.
It's like when you're beating on the stuff and the words will just not form a sentence that's pretty, right?
I will get so blocked on that story, and I actually have a number of stories in my files that have never been finished because I tried to push them and they didn't.
Tried to make them do something they didn't want to do, right?
Yeah.
Because the words will flow when the words
Yes.
want to, when you're
Yes.
paying attention to them and respecting what it is they're trying to do.
And you're giving them their space.
You're giving them their space. Fabric's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Fabric requires that you pay attention. I mean, you if you try to bully fabric into doing something, it will make you pay.
Yes.
It will make you pay.
And I mean, so then my other medium, which is ink, and I do sumi-e, so ink with a
yeah.
brush. And as soon as ink hits the paper, there's no take backs.
No.
So every single stroke, you have to map it out in your head where it's going on the paper first. And because I'm stubborn and I do things the hard way, I don't usually
really?
I don't usually pencil sketch.
I never noticed that about you.
Because I first learned how to do this doing sumi-e, and you don't pencil sketch. Each stroke is its own thing. It happens.
You have to respect where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Because if you don't, you've just spoiled your paper and your mood. And
Yep. Another thing too, when people do ruffles, they're like, they just sew it and they don't pay attention. Now, if I sewed this and didn't pay attention and just sewed it that way, when it went to hang, it would hang funny
yeah,
because it was sewed funny.
yeah,
So craft and what you do matters, and paying attention to what you want the end thing to be.
yes.
So like in my beginning and ends, you get Tabitha here. I love my sister. Her name is Tabitha. You know, when I put fresh pins on her, they're all like, you know, they're all spiky. They're all very calm on Tabitha today. So, but if you want something to be straight and smooth, you have to plan for it to be straight and smooth. So I pin it so it doesn't wander either direction. And I want all of this to be straight and smooth and hang straight from the bottom. So I have to make sure it hangs when I sew it, that I'm maneuvering it so it is straight. Same thing with words,
Right.
you know.
And I mean, so ink on paper is very two-dimensional. Fabric is very three-dimensional. Words are almost four-dimensional because you have
They
the
are.
time as well as
Yeah.
the other dimensions. So
Well, and
you've
how they
got-
taste. How do they taste when you say them in your brain?
Yeah.
What do the words taste like?
There are some things that are just really fun to say. Oh
Butterfly.
my gosh. Well, and not even that too, but I'm also thinking there's the Dr. Demento. It's not a song, Bulbous Bouffant,
Oh, yes.
because they're so much fun to say.
Yes, they are.
And there are words like that, and then there are words that are just really unpleasant to
Moist.
say. Well, moist is one that's a fun joke, but there's other words that are just not fun to say. And
Cacophony.
yeah, and I mean, so
Blubber.
I talk about fonts having a flavor
They do.
because I got asked in the Discord because I created the little book cover workshop channel,
Oh, fun. Okay.
and now I have people that'll come in there and be like, "Hey,
That's-
I'm working on."
Book Club with Spikes, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's the Discord. So.
Right, and they're working on something, and somebody today was like, "So, what's your favorite science fiction font?" And I'm like, "You can't just ask that because there's not a single, because they all have flavors,
I will say that there's one font that everybody uses that I am so tired of.
and that font would be
It's the one that has the weird. I mean, everybody think it looks sort of Celtic. I used it on my wedding invitations almost 30 years ago, and I'm like, it's done.
It's
Let
old.
it die.
It's tired.
And I see it over and over and over again. It's just like, oh my God, people stop. Don't look like everybody else, because it's not. There's nothing unique about it anymore.
Yeah.
There's nothing unique. It's just it doesn't have any new flavor, and everybody thought it was like, oh, it's the coolest new flavor of the week. No, it's not.
well, and that's what I was saying about the science fiction fonts. Is there's ones that have a playful flavor. They maybe got they don't line up quite right from top
Yeah.
to bottom. They're staggered.
Yeah.
And then there's the big blocky sans serif that are very action.
Well,
go.
and there's Star Trek,
Yeah.
you know, or Star Wars. It's the very
Yeah,
They
and
always the S's that
you
are
can
like the
actually
squares
get
and
fonts that evoke those particular things.
Yes.
And then there's one font that I showed today that I'm like, don't use this one because it's sort of cursive-ish,
Oh,
and it's unreadable.
yeah,
So
unreadable
that's
fonts.
an unpleasant flavor.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel right. It's like a
Right.
fabric that's polyester that hits you wrong. I mean, it
Yes.
catches funny when you're trying to. I mean,
I
because
have gardener's hands.
I know.
Fabric catches me,
yeah, I have the same problem.
and
is
I don't
that
like it.
fabric dries out my hands, and when I'm working with a really fine silk, I have to be very careful because I can snag some fabrics. Or when you're in the process of trying to smooth something out and you grab the whole fabric and it slides. Ugh.
But you don't want to do lotion either because then you can potentially
Well-
stain or grease up the fabric.
Yeah,
So if you do lotion, you have to take a break.
yeah, you can tell if I've been sewing a lot because I have no fingernails. I mean, I have fingernails because I haven't been sewing, because my fingernails take an enormous amount of abuse while I'm sewing. So,
Yeah.
and so do my hands, which
Yeah.
see nasty, right? And I'll show you why that hurts when I sew a lot, because when I go to do this putting this on, this requires a whole lot of sitting and holding. I don't know if you guys can see what I'm actually doing.
They can see, but they're about to see better
Okay,
because I'm playing videographer today.
you're playing videographer today. When I do this, when I go to sew this, I'm holding down both sides. Make sure I get my right stitch length here. And I use a very small stitch length, so. But as I'm going along, I'm pulling this out and flattening it out. So right here along the stitches, I'm just getting the thing, but I have to hold it on both sides.
Yeah.
And when you do this for an entire day, see how
That's a lot of pressure on those joints.
it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of manipulation. And yeah, I sew over my pins because my Bernina eats pins for breakfast. This is a Bernina 1008 machine, which they stopped making. Insanely stupid thing. But this particular machine is incredibly powerful and incredibly strong and can go from silk to canvas to silk and not choke.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I know I've had machines that just would not. I've tried sewing canvas with just a regular sewing machine, and let me tell you, no.
No, it doesn't like it. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm straightening the fabric out. So as I sew here, it's straight this way.
Yeah.
So, but it's a slow process. And, you know, I'm a pretty screaming stitcher. And when I'm sitting here doing this by myself, I move a little faster because I'm not talking at the same time.
Right.
But my hands will pay the price for it. Because the pressure of making sure it stays where it should. And it's like I get about 1.5 inches of sewing each time I stitch.
I'm probably gonna get right in your personal space with the phone, sorry.
You know what? I worked in the theater for 30 years. There's no such thing as personal space. I see everybody in their underwear. So.
Not quite the same thing as having something lurking in your peripheral vision, though.
I've had children.
Oh, that's true.
I've had a child who was very good at, well, she also learned that coming anywhere near mom when she's sewing, she didn't have arterial spurt, and a bone wasn't sticking out, it was like, no.
I ran a business from home from the time my oldest was about a year old, about 1.5 years old, because I started running the business very seriously when my second daughter was born and my ex quit his job.
Don't you love when they do that?
Abruptly.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you have children to support, that's the smart thing, right? You
Right,
quit your
and-
job.
I mean, he was mad because his boss had said he couldn't take time off for the birth because he didn't have any personnel left in the store other than him. So, yeah, but anyhow.
Still.
Right? Yeah, it's amazing how people can justify things. So running the business at that point became paramount.
Amazingly enough, right after
And,
having a baby.
And
So,
my kids got trained from before they could remember how to behave while mommy was working. If there's not a fire and there's not blood during office hours, you leave me alone.
it's funny. I have a big pair of scissors that I routinely would cut, and then I would just drop it on the table. And my daughter I had not seen my daughter for quite a while, and she came over to the shop up in Oregon, and I was sewing away, and I dropped the scissors. She went, "Wow, there's the sound of my childhood." Your scissors dropping on the table. I was like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, Mom, when you put the scissors down, I knew you were done, and I could come in and talk to you." And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. So, no, it's kind of funny, isn't it?
Yes.
But what I find with a lot of people who are learning to sew is they get impatient because they just want to get the thing done. You know, and they remind me of teenagers who are desperate to get out into the world and do things, is that they want to do all the things right now, but they don't realize that sewing isn't about the end thing. Sewing is about the process.
Yes.
And understanding your process. The better your process is, the better your delivery. Right? Same thing with books. You get all impatient to get your stories done.
Yes.
And you've forgotten that you have to pay attention to your process. And
with practice, you can actually increase your speed. I mean,
Well, yeah.
I'm planning on in the next 24 to 36 hours, I will be writing about 5,000 words, which
Yeah.
if I didn't also have a day job and a teenager and a husband would not actually be difficult to do. I could get it done today. However,
however, there are those issues, right? And it's just,
but I've been doing this for well over a decade, and I have the story in my head. I've already done the brain work. So now it's just a matter of letting it come out on the paper.
it's true.
And I think, with sewing, by the time you get to the point where you are right now, where you're actually doing the stitching, you've already done all that.
Yeah, I know where I'm
Brain work.
going. I know
Right.
where this. I know what this one looks like when it's done. It's really pretty. It's got a really beautiful black moire lining, which is stunningly beautiful fabric. It has a really nice feel to it as well, and a sheen that I find really fascinating. because it's hidden. It's got a hidden look to it.
Yeah.
The fabric speaks to you, and the more you look at it, and I like that. You know,
Yeah.
it's something with depth and interest to it, because I don't like flat, boring fabrics, and I don't like flat, boring stories either. I want a story that's got some depth and some color to it. And each one of these capes, in a lot of ways, is me telling a story with fabric. So,
There's many, many ways to tell a story.
oh my God,
I
no
mean,
kidding.
There's words, yes. There's also the spoken word, because you can put so much more into the spoken word, the audio, than you can into a book. I mean, the book would be 3 times as long if you told the same story and you had to describe it. But then you have the sewing, just art like paintings and drawings tell stories.
Well, yeah.
So many ways.
What I found, sewing for me was a way to be connected to the world, because when I really, really got full bore into sewing, I was in my 20s, and I thought that I was never going to have children. I'd had some fairly serious health issues that were like, yeah, no kids for you. Ha! They were wrong. But it was also a way for me to connect with thousands of years of history, thousands
Yes.
of years of women, and every piece on a person, every piece of clothing I would see, to me, was the story of somebody who created it. Either, and when I go and I look at vintage clothing, or I look at historical clothing, because I understand what's involved in the stitching and how the stitches look, I can tell what kind of mood they were in when they were stitching.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me, in my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother's things that I have from passing away. I know who the stitchers are. I can look at the various quilts and the quilt tops and go, oh, this is Grandma Dot's. Oh, this is Grandma Christopher. Grandma Christopher had a very tight, very intense, very tiny stitch.
Yeah.
And she was a very tight, very intense, very tiny person who was not very nice. And her fabric choices were ugly anyway. Grandma Dot had a very lyrical stitch. You could tell it was very relaxed. It was something that was very meditative for her. And there was a looseness, but a cleanness to all of her stitching, And my mother's precision was just mathematical. I mean, she had the most amazing, you can look at an entire quilt that she made, and there is not a bit of difference from the beginning to the end.
A very controlled person.
Well, she's very controlled, but the only place she had any control in her life was in her sewing. And it was fun when I found a quilt, a little quilt tester that she was trying to put together to see if she liked it or not, because I could tell where she started, and I could tell where she got frustrated, that she didn't like how that quilt was going together, because she did tester pieces all the time and some things by hand, and this was oh hell no. I could tell that she was like, I made one square, no. And I have a lot of respect for that, because that was her giving herself permission to not do something.
Yes, which is important, and I think
Yeah.
I've had issues with that. I mean, I've also had to learn how to say no to myself,
Yeah, learning to say no is a big deal.
because otherwise I would be off on new projects going, oh, bright, shiny.
Yeah,
Sometimes
well-
literally shiny.
But also, I think sometimes when you get partway through into a thing, and you've worked out a problem in the thing that you're working on, it is okay to stop, even if the project isn't done, because you've already done the learning that you were doing while you were working towards that part of the project. So, as an artist, it's okay to have unfinished things. Because it taught you something. I mean, I have, like I said, I have my entire pile of what I call my punishment pile of sleeves, because I hate sleeves. I have an entire sleeve rant, because people think sleeves are easy. They are not. They are
No, sleeves are not easy.
Sleeves are not easy, and so I have a class that I teach on, that I used to teach, because I don't do that anymore, on how to, I go through the entire box of, this is where I started, this is the one I first did, this is what I was learning on it, this is what I learned on this sleeve, this is why I threw it in the box. And then I pull out the next set of sleeves, and I say, and this is how I fixed that problem, and this is how I discovered this new problem, and I had to do this thing. And And I think you guys, as authors, I see authors go through a similar process where they write something and they go, oh, yeah, I kind of blew it. I didn't really build the world here all that great,
Yeah.
you know? And then
you have to go back.
you have to go back.
But unlike sewing, you don't have to unpick all your seams.
The seam rippers are not a tool that stays. These are what we call a consumable.
Right.
Because
You go through a lot of them.
you go through a lot of them, and I'm not going to sharpen this little sucker. But, I mean, there's a sign that was like, if you see me with a seam ripper in my hand, now is not a good time. But it's also, it's just, I mean, it's like editing. All you're doing is editing. I'm just editing whatever it was that I was sewing.
Right. And the only thing you can't undo is the cuts.
Yeah, no. Measure twice, cut once.
Yes.
Always cut bigger.
Yes.
Because you can fix bigger.
Yes.
You can fix smaller too, but oh my god, it's so much worse.
Yes.
It's so much worse.
Words are easier in that regards. I mean,
Well,
now that
yeah.
we aren't relying on typewriters and typewriter ribbons, that is.
You know what I find interesting though is because you guys can do it electronically and you never see, you don't have your iterations to go back and look at. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, some
you
people keep
can.
them. You know?
Well, and you can do that if you, the program I usually use actually allows me to go back and look at the document history and my
Oh, that's
edits,
good.
and it'll show it in like different colors
Oh, that's
for
good.
like different days and stuff that I did to it. So every time I go through and edit it in a session, it'll show me that in a different color, which is super useful sometimes.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I always tell young authors is don't ever delete anything.
No. Do not delete things.
And because you might not want it in this story, but you can always copy it, cut it out of this document, and paste it into an odds and ends folder. It
Yeah.
might come in handy somewhere down the road. You might realize that, oh gosh, that setting, that scenario, whatever, works in this story.
Yeah, that conversation was supposed to be in my next book.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and that's the other thing too, is that foreshadowing, especially for a pantser, can be really, really difficult. So often you'll have to be
Yeah.
like, okay, this doesn't belong here, it belongs there, but I still have to leave a breadcrumb here so the reader isn't blindsided later.
Right?
Sewing, and that's the temporal aspect of writing. Sewing, not as much.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you will edit something off of an outfit, and too often people toss those things out. I know seamstresses who throw out all their scrap. It's like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
I mean, when we did big shows, we kept every single scrap of fabric because we knew at some point we'd probably have to go back and redo it. But I have found that if you keep those things, they can morph into other outfits. You're like, I need sleeves for this. Oh, they look terrible. I'm going to just take them off. Or like, that lapel, wow. Or, yeah, no, it's about 6 inches too long. All of those things can become something else. You know, I mean, that's something that when people talk about fast fashion, they're like, oh, they just throw it away. I'm like, no, you can remake all these things. I mean, it's amazing what you can do with stuff that you have from before.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's this common thing of everybody in the past was tiny. No, people in the past were not tiny. It's just the tiny people's clothing couldn't be used for anything else.
Right.
Because it was tiny and it didn't fit
Right.
anybody else.
Right.
So yeah, people were all sizes, and very often the larger stuff got cut down for the smaller people. And
Because
was
they remade dresses over and over
constantly. I mean, you can trace. There's one piece of one of Queen Elizabeth's dresses that pieces of it turn up for like 200 years. They keep finding bits of it, going, where did they? Oh, look, there it is. You know, and it was a constant remaking. And so I find that people are too willing to throw things out, not only with their writing, but with their sewing, that could be of value. You know, as a creative, there's things that don't ever toss that out.
No. No, and I mean, that also leads to other issues with clutter and fabric stashes out of control, but...
Yeah, but you see, with my stashes, my smaller stuff, becomes collars or cuffs or pin cushions.
Well, yeah,
Or
'cause
bags.
you actually do stuff and use it
Well, okay,
versus
so
just like stashing it.
I only have 2 racks of fabric. Right now. I had 6 more of those full of fabric up at the warehouse in Eugene. And then I had to clean out my mother's house.
Yes.
And you know the phrase, she who dies with the most fabric wins?
Uh-huh.
My response is, she who dies with the most fabric is dead, and all the dreams for that fabric died on the shelf with her.
Yes.
I do not think, people who pride themselves on, oh, I've got such a huge fabric stash. I'm like, yeah, and it's all going to waste. It's all rotting on
Yeah.
your shelves. It's becoming nothing.
Yeah.
It's not, there's nothing about it that's becoming the dream that you wanted it to be. It's just sitting there. And personally, I'm starting to think of that as, and I'm not a religious person, but I think of that as a sin. It's a sin against the creative process to stack yourself up with so much stuff that you cannot create.
Yeah.
So it's a method of avoiding creation. And it,
And it means your children will be angry and resentful after you die, too.
yeah, they'll be angry and resentful at the fact that so much of the good that you wanted to do in your life was left undone. So,
'Cause I know,
yeah.
years and years ago when I still lived in New Hampshire, actually it's funny because Dad and I were both in garb headed to a reenactment event
Yeah.
we were doing living history at the fort at number 4 there in New Hampshire.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
And there was a barn sale. And so
Uh-oh.
we stopped because my dad could
Bought a
not
barn.
pass up a barn sale. Well, a barn sale in New England
know.
is
I was like,
and
garage
this
sale,
was-
buy a
and
garage.
This was a barn. Oh my gosh, gorgeous old house. It had been there since the colonial period. Huge barn, and the barn had been converted into a studio, a workshop for this lady who very obviously sewed and did a lot with fibers. And I was tickled pink because we walked in and there's a lady sitting in the breezeway between the barn and the house, and she's like, everything's in there, here's a big garbage bag, whatever you stuff in the bag is like $10.
Yeah, I did the same thing with mom's stuff.
And I walked in and there was so much yarn in there, and because I can tell by feel, I just was like feeling all these yarns, and I got llama and alpaca and cashmere, and I
Yeah.
got this bag full of wools and all these yarns for $10, and I didn't understand for a long time afterwards because the lady talked to us because there was, fabric, so much fabric, floor to ceiling shelves, custom built shelves because it was
Yeah.
heavy, racks and racks full of books. One of the shelves had broken and there were just like books falling down on the floor of all these crafts and patterns and stuff. And this lady was telling us that her mother had been a hoarder, and I'm looking around the room and going, this is all in immaculate condition and super organized, and this lady obviously knew where stuff went, and there were labels, and why is she saying she was a hoarder? But it took me a long time to realize that what she meant was she had acquired all this stuff.
Yeah.
And now here her child is, who probably didn't live with her,
Yeah.
was trying to empty it all out so she could sell the place and move on with her own life.
Well, see, that's the problem is she was a hoarder. She wasn't a creator. She was all about
Yeah.
having the things, but not actually doing the things.
And she might have done some things, but
Obviously
there
not.
was
She spent all of her time
masses and masses
being
of-
controlled by her masses.
Right.
So,
And it was just like, I was ecstatic because Dad and I walked out of there with garbage bags full of fabric that we could use for the reenacting and the yarns and stuff. And I did use a lot of that. I actually still have some of the yarn. I also passed some on to my daughter when she was getting into fiber arts. I'm going to pick up the camera and angle it so we can see what she
see,
hath wrought.
see how pretty that is now? It
Yes.
still has to be ironed and finished off.
Yes.
There's also some trim that goes right along this bottom edge.
But right now it's floofy.
It's very floofy, but you
Yeah.
can see how it's got a nice even spread to it. And yeah, that's very pretty.
It is.
I mean, it's very light and floaty.
Oh, that'll be a fun one.
Yep, and right there is a problem.
Uh-oh.
You see here? See how I've missed on? There's a little bobble.
Yeah, I see it.
Yep. That's why I always go back and check. There's another one right there. I'm going to pin them. Because I don't like mistakes like that.
Well, and this is your editing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going back and reading your manuscript.
Well, and two, it's one of those things that a finely made piece of clothing, you don't skimp on those things.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and you fix the problems.
Right.
And with a lot of sewing, people don't do that. Is that a bobble?
A lot of people don't edit their manuscripts either.
They don't edit their manuscripts. They don't do the work necessary. And when you're dealing with this kind of lace trim, because this is very organza-like trim, it's very...
Mm-hmm. Has a lot of body.
It does what it wants
It has
to.
character and personality.
Mm-hmm. But checking the work matters.
Yes.
It really does. So I need to fix that bobble. That looks good.
It's funny, this is reminding me of something, which is
What?
I've been working on art for a very vintage retro science fiction cover for Dorothy Grant's upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And someone came in and was like, well, I can tell that's AI rendered because if you zoom in really close, it's got this flaw and that flaw and the other flaw. And Dorothy and I looked at each other and we said, we're going to have to find some of the art on some of the old science fiction books and take away the text and then see if people can tell AI versus artist in a hurry.
Artist in a hurry.
because especially when you're talking about very impressionist painterly styles, sometimes the mouth is just a smudge.
Yeah. Sometimes it is. So
But it's harder to edit paint.
well, now you just paint over it. So
Yes.
Mhm.
It depends on where you are in
whether or
the
not you can
painting.
paint over it, right?
There's some points where you're kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Because I also work with watercolor, and once that pigment hits the paper,
You're done.
sometimes some watercolor you could actually pick up, but some pigment is highly staining.
Watercolor is scary.
Watercolor is
It's like sewing on leather.
Hmm.
Because once you sew on leather, the
Yes.
holes are there.
Yes,
And
they
you aren't,
are.
there is no fixing that.
It's not like Bob Ross's Happy Little Tree.
Happy little tree.
I mean, I suppose you could poke other holes and make it into looking like a tree. Oh, the look on your face.
No. And the answer would be no. Yeah, no, it's, some silks are like, scary. And yeah, like, I don't want to go there. Mommy, it hurts. So, because it will kill you.
So if anyone watching this is wondering why we are having wiggles and jiggles when we talked about having a gimbal, it's because the gimbal ran out of battery really quickly into doing this, because I didn't realize it had been turned on for an extended period of time. I don't know how long.
You know what? It's a learning process.
It is, and I'm doing pretty good at keeping it stable, I think. I mean, when we
Well,
watch
plus
this
I-
later, who knows?
Who knows? It could be Jonna's like doing stuff on the table here, so it's moving, right?
No, I bumped the table with my knee. So.
Well, yeah, I do that too. It's my workspace. I mean, it's my happy spot. I sit here and I sew, and I usually have music on, usually listening to Baroque.
And I'm over here and I get to read your messages. You just sold something.
Oh, did I?
You did.
I wonder what I sold.
I didn't flash up long enough for me to read.
Oh, no, it wouldn't. It would just, I mean, eBay has this wonderful thing. It's a little addictive. It's very Pavlovian, I've got to say. That when you sell something, your eBay app will go ka-ching.
Oh, that's fun.
I'm like, okay then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's fun. I've been doing a lot of postings because eBay is paying the rent right now.
Right. Well, it's like I'm about to, actually this evening, we'll be picking up a print order that I made slightly larger than it needed to be.
Yeah.
Because I need to sell some prints. But I won't be putting them on eBay. They'll go on my website.
Yeah.
So I will be selling some signed art from the recent Raconteur Press covers.
Yes, because wow, are you knocking those out of the park?
I am having a blast with those. I mean, I love the fact that I get to have as much artistic control in those as I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's been, this past couple of years has been like a big learning curve and then serious step up in my cover design work.
Yeah.
Something finally clicked for me, I think.
Yep. Well, the more
So-
you do it, the better you get at it, right?
Right.
So
And I
this
really
is a conversation
started,
we're having constantly, you know.
yeah, and I started really studying the design and what makes different things work.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that's actually been Dorothy. Dorothy Grant has been helping me with that because she'll come up with these insights, and I'm like, dang, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then that leads to, and then it extrapolates out into things, which is the fun thing about having conversations with creatives, because she would
Yes.
say that she's not a design person.
Oh, but she is.
She's very much, but she would say she wasn't. But you have,
And we all
these-
nod and say yes, Dorothy.
Yes, but we have these conversations with people that are sometimes outside of our field, or they might feel like they're out of their depth, but they give you these ideas that spark and ignite other ideas, and it becomes this firecracker chain reaction.
And then you have a publishing company and you didn't even know it.
right? That's a whole thing too.
Uh-huh. I'm
So-
big on having instigators around. You know, people who just sort of like throw ideas out and leave them lying on the floor. And there's so many of them lying about, you can't help but trip over one. Right?
Oh yes. No, and that's been the fun thing about
I do that all the time.
the fun thing about Raconteur and the themes that keep getting brought up for anthologies is I find it very easy to write for, because I'm like, ooh, I want to, and then my brain goes bouncing off happily down in these rabbit trails, and I get to write these things.
Yes.
So
Yeah, plus we're brainstorming on, because we very much like the happy, silly, fun, sense of wonder kind of stuff. And we all do. I mean, we kind of live in that space. All of us do, right?
Yeah.
And Raconteur Press is very much in that pocket of writing those kinds of finding and publishing those kinds of stories.
yeah.
So now I'm all full of like, so what could we do next? So, you know, I mean, what could be the next thing we do? And so we've been spitballing a couple of ideas while we're just sitting around on the blanket fort. And I went, we need to do Tales from the Blanket Fort.
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. We've got, Jim Curtis does the Tales Around the Supper Table, which are these
fun.
wonderful collections
I need
of,
to fix that one.
the main theme there is that they're people that have been to supper at Jim's.
Yes.
So they're all Texan or Texan adjacent writers, and so you get this lovely smorgasbord of stories, because they aren't all science fiction, they aren't all fantasy, some of them aren't either of those, and the main thing that they are, they're stories that have their genesis sitting at the supper table talking with other
Yes.
writers and
About
other
all
peoples.
kinds of strange things.
Yeah.
I mean, we were over there
So-
for dinner last night for Memorial Day. We had wandered off into some sort of what was it? We had something. We just started wandering off in a direction of I was talking to Wayne because I hadn't seen Wayne since before I went to Italy. Wayne, who's hilarious and funny. And
This is Wayne Wisnand, who also writes.
yes.
So
well, I turned around and I was telling him about the pinup noir stories that we've gotten for pinup noir.
yes.
And I said, "Oh, by the way, you're writing me a story." And he's like, "I am." I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, you have enough." I said, "No, we're doing 2 and 3."
Yes.
And I said, "You can't tell me you don't have enough stories from hanging out with Law Dog that you can't come up with a good pinup noir." And he went, "Oh," and off he went. And so he started telling me this thing. I'm like, "Don't tell me, tell the paper. Go write it down, you know." And
Talk to the paper.
talk to the paper, talk to the hand, you know. And then he started relaying this adventure that is classic pinup noir. And I was like, "Why are you talking to me?" So
Because sometimes we rubber duck at you.
yes, you do. And I'm like, well, I think Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson is right. Is that we verbalize things so we can organize our thinking.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
And so so if you verbalize something at somebody who doesn't write or is like, well, have you thought about doing blah? It makes a big difference. So
Well, and you can do it to somebody that does write too, because
Well, you're all
Saturday
writers.
supper,
You're all writers.
a friend who's a writer came into town to do some house hunting in the area, and she handed me her phone. And
Don't
I
get
read
any
through-
ideas.
I read through.
Those of you listening, don't get ideas.
I read through like half a story that she'd started for Pinup Noir, and then
Yeah,
she
she
got
got
stuck
stuck.
on it. And I'm like, well, first of all, don't give up because we're opening again.
Yep.
But second of all, it was a really, really good story, and I was able to
Yeah.
kind of give her some ideas of where she might go, and I could see the light bulb go on. So I think she'll start writing again on it, which was really great. But yeah, no, I mean, we have the most fun conversations.
We do. Yeah, but that is, I have to say, you know, as in terms of authors, that's a lot of fun. I don't have a lot of
Yes.
people I can do that with on sewing.
No.
So I want your daughter to move close so I can actually talk to her.
Yeah.
So as people who
Or
can.
Emma, we could get Emma. drag
Yeah, Emma and
down
I, I'm
here.
like, okay, girl. So it's kind of fun in our Texas Troublemakers. Every now and then somebody will say something. I'm like, Emma, I don't have energy for this rant again. She's like, I got it. We're good. I got you covered. Because I'm like, please don't make me do this again. Because there's only so many times I can have the pink is period conversation.
Yes.
And without, I mean, I've only done that one for 35 goddamn years. So
Tell us in the comments, do we need the pink is period conversation to
No.
be recorded?
no. The answer would be no. Unless you spent a lot of time in Elizabethan clothing. You don't need that rant from me. So I will, however, give you a big long rant about, God damn it, iron your seams. So yeah, that kind of stuff makes me crazy. But
Ooh, flat fell seams. I do not miss those.
actually, they're not as hard as people make them to be.
They're just a pain in the tush when you're hand sewing and you've already sewn the seam once and now you have to sew it again. And
It's not that complex.
No,
and
it's not
surgeons solve that
complex.
problem, so you don't have to.
well, yeah, but sergers were definitely not period correct.
No, but who knows?
Dad was putting his garb together for American Mountain Men.
Okay, so the American Mountain Men guys, I have to tell you, are the
Mad
Laurel
respect, but
because my ex-husband Tim, delightful man that he is, joined them. And I am a longtime SCA person who has dealt with the mistress seam checkers, who you go to reach out your hand and they go, oh, let's look at your seams. And I'm like, yeah, honey, the apprentices did all the straight seams. You didn't do them. And you wouldn't have been in the sewing guild because you're a woman. So,
Yes.
and having seen the inside of actual doublets from the time period, no, they didn't do a certain stitch per inch and all that nonsense. They were just as messy as we were.
yes.
My friend Drea went and helped at the Victorian Albert Museum doing recording some of their clothing history, the clothing that they had, including a doublet that had a pin sewn into the singing. Somebody left a pin in by mistake. So
Ow.
so this has actually been a thing it's common. And the question is, done is good.
Yes, done is good.
But there's also sometimes people get so wrapped up in the minutia of thinking that because they have one garment from that particular era and that particular time frame, that
everything has to
everybody was sewn that way. It all was sewn with 14 stitches per inch. No, that person sewed that garment with 14 stitches per inch. Unless you can produce 25 more from the same era and the same area, no, that proves nothing.
Yeah, and there was
So-
nothing standardized, and nobody was going around measuring.
Even their methods of measuring weren't standardized. So,
No.
and that's a whole nother rant. So,
Yes, it is, and I think we're about out of time for
I think
today.
we are.
So.
I mean, so you got a little bit of what Jonna does because most of the time it's all about what all the writers do here. So,
yeah,
and
time for some visual art.
yeah, well, you know,
Gives us color and texture. And,
when I get this one done, we'll show it to you guys.
yes.
So, but I'm going to stop on it for now because I have to figure out what I sold on eBay and get it packed so I can ship it out tomorrow. So it's fun hanging, guys. This is a little bit different format this time.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll have Courtney back for the next time,
That's okay.
but
We have some fun stuff
We
planned
have some
and
other
upcoming,
things going.
some surprises for y'all.
other
and,
stuff. So,
And we're gonna continue to play with our new toys because my son walked in and handed off microphones. So we now have lapel microphones that'll actually hook to the phone, and the gimbal to
Yes.
stabilize it if I can charge it and not like leave it
well,
on.
you know,
So yeah, we have the tools now to do some really fun.
we're getting there.
Stuff.
We're getting there.
Yeah,
Things are happening.
yeah.
It's good. So we'll see you next week. We don't know what next week looks like, but we'll figure it out.